Hey everybody, my name is Jason, also known as Pirate JC, and welcome to part 6 of the Mystery Demo Tutorial series. In this series, if you've been following along, then you know that we've been walking through a process, building a demo together, step by step from scratch, but I'm not telling you what it is that we're building. That's right, we're gonna find out at the very, very end what it is that we're actually building together. If you've been following along in this series, then so far you know we have spent a good amount of time inside the node material editor, diving into math and creating a water caustics effect. Well, today I'm very happy to say that we are going to leave the world of node material and dive into the playground. The playground is, of course, the place in Babylon where you can write code and we can start to assemble our scene. But first, before we do, if you have not had a chance to check out the other videos in this series, please check the description down below where you can follow along and get caught up to where we are in this video. Okay, without any further ado, let's jump right on in. This is the playground. You can find this by going to playground.babylon.js.com. This, of course, is a place where you can write code on the left and then see it update in the scene on the right. And we're just going to start diving right on in and building out our demo together. But don't worry, we're going to reference the stuff we've done in the past and use that in this video. Okay, so to start off, we have a scene. It has a camera in it, a light, and then a sphere and a ground plane. This particular camera is a free camera. It allows you to kind of use the arrow keys to move around with kind of a first-person type of a control. It's not actually my favorite type of camera, so we're actually going to get rid of it. We're going to take these two lines here and let's delete them and then just start writing our own camera code here. So we're going to create a new variable called main camera, and I'm going to construct a new Babylon.arcRotate camera. The arc rotate camera is one of my favorites. It basically is a camera that orbits around a central target. And you can set a bunch of parameters, of course, with like how far around it goes and up and down, all that kind of stuff. So let's give this camera a name. We'll call it main camera. It's going to want, first and foremost, the alpha number. That's the rotation around horizontally around your target. By default, Babylon wants to work in radians. I prefer to work in degrees. So we can actually do that. There's a handy helper for that, babylon.tools.2radians. And I'm going to type in 100 to start us off for the horizontal number, 100 degrees. And then same thing for the beta, that's the vertical rotation. We want babylon.tools.2radians. And I'm going to give this a value of 85. Next, it wants the radius, that's the distance away from the target, how far away it is. And so we're going to give this an initial value of 10. And then finally, it wants the location of the target itself. It wants a vector 3. So we're going to say babylon.vector3. And we're going to give this a negative 0.25, 1, and 0. And then finally, it's going to want the scene. By the way, I know I'm going super, super fast in this video. We're going to continue to go fast, but please feel free to pause at any time, to slow it down. Make sure you take the time to actually see what I'm writing out and make sure you go at your own pace. Don't feel like you have to rush along with me. I'm just doing this so we can get lots of content in and you have it all available to you. Okay, so for this scene, there's another thing I want to do. We're actually going to have two cameras. We're going to have this main camera, which is going to be an arc rotate camera. Let me actually show you what that looks like, by the way. Camera, okay, yeah, of course, I need to change this variable to, in case you can't see that full error, it says that camera is not defined, of course, because I was looking for the previous variable name of camera. So I'm going to call this main camera, and now let's hit play. Okay, so now I have a camera that orbits around, both horizontally and vertically, orbits around a center target. So that is the arc rotate camera. But we're going to actually have two cameras in the scene. This main camera is going to be used for the scene itself. That's the traditional one that we'll use to actually look out of for the final demo. But we're also going to have another camera. And we want these two to be separate. We want them to exist in separate worlds. So what one sees, the other camera does not see, and vice versa. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to say main camera is going to have .layerMask is going to be 1. So we're going to say the main camera is associated with the layer mask 1. And then, of course, we're going to have another camera. And in fact, let's go ahead and actually just create that right now. So we'll go down here and say var, and we'll call this texture camera. And it's going to be also a arc rotate camera. but it's going to have some different numbers in it. So we'll call it texture camera. There we go. And the alpha number, we're going to say 0. The beta number, we're going to say 0. The radius is going to be 190. We want this thing up high, looking basically straight down from pretty high up. So it's going to be 190. And then it wants, let's just give it the origin. This we have a little handy helper for. You can say Babylon.vector3.0. And we can give that a method. And then it finally wants the scene. Okay, sweet. And so now we have a texture camera. I do, as I mentioned, want the texture camera to be associated with a different set of information. So we're going to say texture camera dot layer mask, and we're going to give this one a value of 2. So now the main camera is on one, the texture camera is on the other, and the two shall not see what the other one sees so long as we assign things to those particular layer masks. Okay. Now, the main camera is going to be a normal camera, a perspective camera where we can kind of see in a 3D kind of view. But texture camera, we want it to be a little bit different. So we're actually going to make this texture camera, we're going to say .mode. And .mode, we want to set it to 1. Now, if we hover over mode, it'll tell us a little bit more about it. Basically, it's saying a camera can either be a perspective camera in Babylon or an orthographic camera. Orthographic camera is basically just compresses the three-dimensional space more or less into kind of a flat card-like experience. And I can show you that in a minute. And so an orthographic camera, we're setting it to 1, which is ortho, and we want to give it a few extra parameters. So let's say texture camera dot ortho bottom, and we're going to give that a value of -7. And then we want to say texture camera dot ortho, let's do left. We'll also say -7 there, -7. And then texture camera dot ortho right is going to be +7. I thought I made a typo there. And texture camera dot ortho top also +7. Okay, at this point, let's go ahead and play. And I'm still looking through the main camera. And then if I go to this options menu, this gear icon, and I go down to inspector and I open it, this is the inspector. If you haven't used this before, it is an amazing tool to basically see what's happening inside of your scene. If I open up nodes here, then I have my two cameras. And in fact, the main camera, which is seeing the sphere and the ground plane, and then the texture camera, if I look out of this one, we're up high, very far away. I'm still seeing the sphere and the ground plane. And the reason for that, and by the way, this is kind of what the orthographic looks like. It's just a much more flat, non-perspective view. The reason that I'm seeing the sphere and the plane, the ground, in both cameras is because I haven't assigned them to a layer mask. So let me show you how we can actually do that. Right here, we can go down to sphere and we'll say sphere.layerMask, and we'll set it to 1. And then we're going to do the same thing with the ground as well. We'll say ground.layerMask, and we'll set that to 1 as well. Okay, and so now we can see it in the main camera because that's layer mask number 1. And then if I look through the texture camera, I don't see anything. Perfect, that's what we expect. Now I'm going to pause momentarily here because this inspector is a super handy tool, and we're going to want to use it a ton through the development of this demo. So rather than having to go and click on this gear icon every single time I want to make an update, we can actually tell Babylon to load it every single time. So here's how we do that. I'm going to go up to the top right underneath the declaration of the scene, the creation of the scene, and we're going to say, okay, I want scene.debugLayer.show. And then I want to create some specific parameters in here. So if I just hit play now, it will come up, but it's side by side. I actually want to say, you know what? I'd like you to be embedded like it was before, just to save on kind of screen real estate. So we can do that by embed mode is set to true. And now if we hit play, we get that nice, awesome embed mode. And now every time that we play this, the inspector is up and available to us. Okay, so at this point, the next thing is we've got two cameras. We've got them associated with different layer masks. That's fantastic. The next thing is that I want to take the texture camera and we want to do some work on that side in layer mask number 2. Specifically, what we're going to do is we're going to take a plane and we're going to create a plane and we're going to use that as the source for the Caustics material. And then we're going to take that node material and apply it onto that plane. So when we're done, we should see a plane with kind of a Caustics effect on it, but only in the texture camera. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, we're going to go down here and we're going to say that we want to, new variable. We'll call it water plane, I think would probably be pretty good. Yeah, call it water plane. We're gonna make sure we're nice and organized for this. Water plane. And we're gonna say new Babylon.mesh.createGrounds. Now I'm using this particular constructor because, we'll give it a name. We'll say water plane. I'm using this particular one because I can not only specify the width and the height, which I'm setting to 15, but I can also set the subdivisions. Now, we want a lot of resolution. Our Caustics material that we built in the past is based on resolution, right? It moves the vertices and based on that creates a pattern. And so we want a lot of resolution here. So I'm actually gonna set this pretty high. I'm gonna set that to 400. That's something that we'll definitely want in the future. And then I'm going to say waterplane.layerMask, and we'll set it to 2. So now this new plane that's gonna be created will only be available to the texture camera. So let's go ahead and hit play. We'll go look through the texture camera, and there is our full plane. It's white. That's okay, there's the plane. It's white because remember, we're top down, and these numbers here for the ortho bottom, left, right, and top basically tells it to fill the screen based on its height. Those are the right numbers to fill up the screen. And so that is kind of what that looks like. That's what the water plane is for now. Okay, so we have the plane, but now what we need to do is we need to actually put the node material, the Caustics material, onto that plane. So we built the Caustics previously in a separate part of Babylon, in a node material editor. It didn't have code that you wrote. We wrote a shader together visually. But inside the playground, you can actually reference saved URLs that we've done in the node material editor. This is super, super cool. I really think you're gonna like this. So what we're gonna do is we're now gonna say, I want to create a, we'll call it water shader, okay? We'll call this the water shader. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna say Babylon.nodeMaterial.parse from snippet async, okay? And what this is going to do is look for, and I actually have our previous node material session up here. It's gonna look for this hash right here. Everything after the first pound sign is what it's going to be looking for, okay? And so we're gonna copy that, and I'm going to pass that in quotes. So it's, remember, everything after the first pound sign, that's important, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to attach it to the scene, okay? And then we're gonna keep going with this. We're gonna say .then, we're gonna say node material, that's the loaded node material, okay? And then we're gonna make our little arrow here and say that we want the node material .name. I wanna give it a name. I'm gonna call it caustic material. And then the next thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that my water plane that I created up here has this material set to it. So we can say waterplane.material is equal to node material. Okay, so now what we have is we're going to load the result of this NME work. All that crazy math that we did is now going to be loaded, okay, together all at once, asynchronously, into the Babylon playground, and then we're assigning it to the water plane here. Okay, so let's go ahead and press play and see what happens. Of course, nothing here because everything that we're operating in right now is based in the layer mask number 2, which of course is where the texture camera is located. So we'll look through that, and there we have our caustic material being applied to the plane itself. Now, the values at this range and this resolution, they don't look amazing. It doesn't look a ton like water caustics. That's okay. We're gonna fix that in the future. So don't worry too much about it right now. Just the fact that we see it is what's super, super important here, okay? All right, so the next thing that we're gonna do, now that we have a camera that's pointed straight down, just open this back up fresh here. This is pointed straight down, looking at a full framed view of this plane with the water caustics on it. Now what I want to do is I want to say, I want to take the view of this camera and I want to turn it into a texture. It's called a render target texture. Everything that this texture camera sees, I would like to turn that into a texture. And here's why we're going to do that. We're going to take that texture, project it out of a light onto our scene. You can think of it as if you're familiar with the film world at all, a gobo is a mask in the film world that's put on top of a light to create a certain pattern, so it only lets light through in some ways. We're going to use that same principle here to take our caustics and project them out of a light. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a render target texture. Okay, so we now have our water shader here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a render target. Okay, so we'll call it, let's just call it that. Let's call it render target. So render target, and we're going to say new Babylon dot render target texture. Okay, and the way this works is, let's give it a name. I'm going to call it RTT, render target texture. Sounds good. I want to give it a size. I'd like it to be 1K, and then I'm going to attach it to the scene. Okay. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say render target, and we're going to say what's the active camera for this particular render target. And of course, the one that we want to use is, oh, I actually did that wrong. It's not a method. I don't believe. Let's check. Active camera is a property. Yeah, fantastic. So equals, and then we're going to use the texture camera. Okay. Next thing is we're going to type scene dot custom render targets. Okay, this is a property of the scenes, and we're going to push. This is basically, think of this as a stack of all of the custom render texture targets. Did I say that right? Render texture targets on the scene itself. So it's a collection of them. So we want to push, which means add to the stack, this new one. So it's a method, and of course, what we're going to pass in is our render target. Okay. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is say, okay, in the render target itself, there's a render list. So what should actually be rendered? So there's a particular thing that we want to be associated with the texture, and that's the water plane, of course. So we're going to say render list, render target.render list.push. It's also a stack, so you can have multiple objects contribute to that texture. And for us, we want just the, oops, I went too far. There we go, the water plane. Okay, so now we're adding the water plane to the available assets that are going to be composed of rendered for the render target texture, all right? And so then the next thing that we're going to do, actually, you know what, I think we'll stop there. I think that's actually it for now. That's the render target, so we've set it up. And then the next thing that we're gonna do is actually take our light, and we're gonna say, hey, light, rather than just project light, use this render target texture as a means to be able to project everything out, okay? And so to do that, what we're going to do is not use this particular light here. So let me scroll up so we can see this. We'll set our light intensity to 1 so we don't forget that now. And then I'm just gonna get rid of some of these comments here. And instead of a hemispheric light, we're going to, let's actually do this. Let's get rid of all of this here. So I'm going to say new Babylon dot, and the specific thing that we're going to be creating here is a spotlight, okay? Instead of a hemispheric light, it's a spotlight. And the constructor, of course, like most, wants a name, so we'll call it spotlight, all right? And then we're going to say, what does it want? It wants the position. Where should the spotlight actually be? So we're going to say new vector3, Babylon.vector3. And this is going to be located high up in the air, 30 units up, directly up. Next thing that it wants is a direction, a vector as a direction. And so I want to say here, well, actually we can use a helper, Babylon.vector3 dot, and then I believe there's a down. Look at that, fantastic. Okay, and then it wants an angle. So this is, if you think of a spotlight, the angle of spread. How far do you want that spotlight to affect? What's the cone of light? And so for this one, I think we want a value. not 90 degrees, maybe a little greater than 45. And again, remember that Babylon works in radians. So again, here we're going to say Babylon.tools.2 radians, and let's say 50. I think we don't want to quite go 45. We don't want to go as high as 90. Exponent. So this is the amount of fall off of the light. Okay, so if you have a super hard cone of light and it goes all the way to the edges of the circle, if you start dialing up this exponent number, it'll be softer and softer. It starts to feather the edge softer and softer and softer. So it basically increases kind of the fall off, makes it fall off a little bit more and more and more based on that number. Okay, and so we'll give it an initial value of 8. And then finally, it wants to add the scene, as we always do. And then, of course, we have light intensity here. Okay, so we have the render target, the render target texture. Okay, that's the Caustics, the view of the texture camera. So again, we have the water plane. We've added the node material Caustics onto that. We've added a texture camera, and we're taking the view of that texture camera, only of the water plane, and saying, let's build a live texture out of this. We've built a spotlight. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to tell the spotlight that we want to use that render target texture as that gobo that I was mentioning, okay? And this is very, very easy. The way that you do that is simply by saying light dot, and then this is very easy, projection texture, and guess what it's going to equal? Render target. Okay, just like that. So spotlights, and they're only spotlights in Babylon, have the ability to use that render target texture and use a projection texture to project out, and it'll project all the way to the edge of that cone based on the angle that you gave it. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. And there you go. Now what we have is Caustics coming from a spotlight that's being projected down into the scene and covering everything just like a light. That's awesome. That we now have Caustics in a Babylon scene. Something that we created over the course of 5 videos together has culminated into our Babylon scene. That's amazing. Now, you're probably looking at this and going, wait, it's all stuttery and there's lines in it. That's true. Because this is based on resolution, and we're using derivatives, which is the change of any given face, the change of the area of a face relative to the pixels, we are going to see some blockiness. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to actually blur that Caustics effect and blur out some of that, that blockiness that we see, okay? So to do this, we're going to embark on a pretty fun world. Now, I'm going to tell you that the adding blur is definitely not something that's super, super easy to understand right away. There's a lot that we're going to go through, but don't worry, we're going to go through it every step of the way together, okay? It's not something you need to worry about. What we'll do is we'll start, let's do it right under the light. Yeah, let's do it. Let's keep our assets, the sphere and the ground kind of separate. So we'll start by creating a new variable called blur, okay? And we're going to set blur equal to 70 to start. And this is where don't worry, we're going to write all this code out. There's a lot that we're going to cover right here for this little chunk to create blur, and then we'll walk through it all together. So just follow along the best you can. So we have a variable called blur. That's the blur. Actually, you know what? Let's be more descriptive. Let's call it blur amount. Blur amount. Fantastic. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say var standard pipeline. Okay, we're going to create a new variable called standard pipeline. And we want this to be a new Babylon, Babylon dot post process, okay, post process. And we want this to be a render, post process render pipeline, okay, not the pipeline manager, the post process render pipeline. We're going to give it the Babylon engine. And then we're going to say the name that it wants, and we're going to call this standard pipeline, okay? And then new line here, and don't worry, again, we're going to run through this quickly, but we'll go over it all. We're going to say we want to create something called horizontal blur, okay? We're going to create horizontal blur and vertical blur, combine them together into an effect. So horizontal blur. By the way, I do have a cheat sheet here. I am definitely referencing it from time to time, but I want to make sure that we're actually writing it out together so we can make any mistakes together, troubleshoot together, but you can actually see this happening. So if you see me looking off camera, but that's my cheat sheet. So horizontal blur, and we're going to say new Babylon dot blur post process. Okay. And in the blur post process, it's going to want a name. We're going to call this one horizontal blur. And new, let's see, what does it want? Yeah, this is the direction of the blur itself. So we're calling it horizontal blur. We want to make sure that it's horizontal. So we'll say new Babylon. It wants a vector 2 here. So vector 2, and of this one being horizontal, we want to go X. This is only in the X direction. Yes, that's right. And then let's see, what else does it want? Kernel. Okay, yeah. So this is where we're going to say the blur amount here. Okay, so this is something that we're going to affect both a horizontal and a vertical blur. So we'll just have one variable that we can change later if we need to. So blur amount, and then we're just going to give this 1. We'll say null, and then I think we want null for the next one. That's sampling mode, and then I think it wants the engine next. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. And then finally, for reusable, we'll set that to false. Okay, so that's horizontal blur. Now we're going to copy, paste, and you can imagine what we're going to do here. We'll call this one vertical blur. Vertical blur. Okay, and vertical blur. Okay. And this one, instead of being in the X direction, we're going to say that this is going to be in the Y direction. Fantastic. Blur amount, same thing, same thing, same thing. Okay, so that is the that's the vertical blur and the horizontal blur. So now we need to go through the process of combining them together. And to do this, we're going to create an effect. Okay, so we're going to say var, we'll call it black and white. Then blur. Okay, so this is a particular effect that we're using. New Babylon.post process render effect is the one we want. And then it wants us to give it the engine. And then it wants a name. And so we're going to give this a name of black and white. Then blur, same thing, nice and descriptive of what's happening. Okay, and so the next thing is we're going to create a function here like this. And then I want to return the horizontal blur and the vertical blur. Okay, so I wrote that out just like this. You got to create a function, and we're going to return the horizontal blur and the vertical blur. And I believe that that is all that we need for creating the effect. Okay. Yeah, it is. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say our standard pipeline that we've created. I guess I can kind of get rid of my face so we can actually see this a little bit easier. And back again. Okay. The standard pipeline dot add effect. Okay, so the effect that we're going to add, of course, is the black and white then blur effect. And then we're going to say scene dot post process render pipeline manager. That's that one. And what we're going to do is, dot add pipeline. And of course, the pipeline that we're going to add is the standard pipeline that we've created. Okay. And finally, we're going to say last line here, same thing, the post-process render pipeline manager. And then we're going to attach it to a specific camera. Okay. And the camera that we want to attach it to, first, I think we have to give it standard pipeline. And then we're going to give it the texture camera. Okay, so we want to say we want to blur the things that are in the texture camera, not the main camera. And that's so then that the texture is blurred, and then when we project it out of the light into the main scene, only that caustic is blurred, not the entire everything in the main camera. Okay, so if we've done everything, oh yeah, I do want to go through this actually. Okay, so there's a lot happening here. So the first thing that we do is we create a post-process render pipeline that we're calling standard pipeline, okay? I'm gonna get myself out of here again. We're basically setting that up. This is a new pipeline. Then we're creating two blurs, a horizontal blur, a blur in the horizontal direction and a blur in the vertical direction. And then we're combining those together with this black and white then blur, okay? It's a post-process render effect. So we're creating an effect that basically then returns the horizontal and the vertical blur together. So then in our standard pipeline that we created here, then what we're doing is we're adding the black and white blur, then blur effect to the standard pipeline, okay? And then there in the scene, there is a post-process render pipeline manager, okay? And we're basically gonna say, okay, we're gonna add to that. It's something that exists. We're gonna add a new one, which is the one that we've created, the standard pipeline. And then finally, which camera should it affect is the last line. So here's where we're adding to the scenes render pipeline manager, post-process render pipeline manager. That's a mouthful. And then here is where we specify the camera that shall be affected, which is the texture camera. And so now if I hit play, what you should see is this blockiness go away and us left with a much better, actually that's pretty bold. Maybe what we should do is we should dial this blur down a little bit for now, just so you can kind of see the effect. There, let's dial it up just a bit more. Let's try 20. Kind of getting rid of that blockiness. There we go. That's looking pretty good. So the blockiness is largely gone. We still get that kind of caustics effect. That's definitely rad. We now have caustics. We've taken the artifacting out by adding blur. Man, we just did a ton of stuff together. So we created a plane. We added our water caustics material onto it. We created a texture, orthographic texture camera, created a render texture target that we, out of the view of that texture camera. And then we took a spotlight and took the render target texture and projected it all over the world with the blur. Man, our demo is starting to come together. One last thing before we call this one, I do want to actually set this blur amount back to 70. That is a value, even though it doesn't look amazing here because of our current caustics value. We're going to continue to dial that in the future. So don't worry, it is still caustics for now, but let's keep that at a blur amount of 70. And without any further delay, we've now finished the end of part 6 of the mystery demo tutorial series. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you've been following along. We covered a lot today. So again, please feel free to stop the video at any time, go back, check things out, follow along. A ton that we got to do, and we're just scratching the surface of what's to come with our demo. Thank you so much for watching. If you have not had a chance to do so, please consider subscribing to this channel so you don't miss any future updates. Thanks a million, and we'll talk to you next time.